Hi, I'm Sheila Kuehl. Welcome to Get Used to It. Get Used to It, as I'm sure you know now because you watch us all the time, is a monthly issues talk show about things that concern the lesbian and gay community. We're very pleased to say that we are being joined this month by affiliates in Washington, D.C. and in San Francisco. We'd like to welcome you, make sure that you do get used to it and watch us every month. This month we have a show that I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and it's sort of like a dream come true, because when you just ask people to show up and they do. This is a roundtable that we're calling the real lesbian and gay agenda. There's a lot of folks out there who aren't us, who've been talking about our agenda. Well, this show is about us talking about our agenda. I'm very pleased to introduce to you people who are joining us today. Monica Palacios, who's a writer-performer and a board member of Viva Gay and Lesbian Latino Artists. Monica, welcome.
Thank you.
Next to her is Lorri, the executive director of the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center here in Los Angeles. Lorri, welcome.
Thanks.
Next to her, David Tseng, who is co-president-elect of Lawyers for Human Rights, the Gay and Lesbian Bar Association in Los Angeles, and who's also special counsel for Pride Behind the Badge. Starting down at the end of this table, Jehan Agrama, who is one of the founders of the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, currently the media co-chair for GLAAD LA. Next to her, Ruth, who's one of the founders of the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum and past chair of that organization. And finally, on my right, but not very much, John Davidson, who is the attorney for lesbian and gay rights for the ACLU of Southern California. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, the notion today is we're going to talk about what we think our own agenda is, and it's kind of an ambitious undertaking, but I wanted to see if I could talk to each of you for a couple of minutes and try to identify sort of in the areas that you work in and anything you think about, what you think our agenda as a community is, should be. Monica, let me start with you as an artist. Clearly a big part of the agenda of any people, any community, and certainly any movement has to relate to visibility. How do you think the arts play a part in that?
Well, as a writer-performer, I mean, my work focuses on being a Chicana lesbian, and what I do with that is I'm visible with it. And with that, I'm somewhat political, talk about issues that I have to confront, such as racism and homophobia, and I present that in a theatrical format.
So do you perform mostly in the community?
Not necessarily, no. When I go out of town, I go into mainstream theaters, and I get pretty much a variety of people coming in to watch me. One time I was at a place and I had children like as young as 9, and I had men late 50s came up to me after the show and said, "Thank you very much. I could relate to what you were talking about." And I covered everything in the show. I just wasn't talking about, being a lesbian. So that really was great for me, that I was able to reach out even to these 9-year-old girls. Of course their mothers were pushing them away from me, but talk to you in 10 years. But it was great that I was able to connect with such a wide spectrum of people.
So it seems like there's a couple of aspects to that, in a sense. I mean, one of them is we perform in our own community. It's very much sort of like my notion of this show, which is our own thing.
Exactly.
There's a gay and lesbian, I don't know if we'd call it a sensibility, or I would, whether it's performing or painting or music or theater. Certainly we started to be much more kind of prominent in terms of theatrical work, and it has to come out of our own work. So do you see the possibility of really sort of doing both those things at the same time, building a culture and sharing it with the straight world?
Definitely. I mean, because I'm a Chicana and I'm a lesbian. I can't escape either of them. I will always have them both, and I want to have them both. So I have to keep in check that I'm in balance with my two cultures. Otherwise, I can't exist.
Well, one of the things that we were talking about before is sort of not only creating the art and making certain that we're visible, but also the sort of ephemeral nature of it, that we don't collect our art. I mean, the Gay and Lesbian Historical Museum or whatever, at least as far as I know, doesn't exist, though there are some collections. Lorri, I remember, or I think I remember at least, that Morris Kite donated his collection of memorabilia, though I don't know it's all art, to the center, kind of create that kind of permanence. Is that?
That's right. He has a very extensive collection of memorabilia from our community struggle going back 25 or more years, and some other art as well, that reflects the kind of expression that a lot of members of our community were doing way back then, when art was one of the few ways that they could easily get the message out.
I remember in the women's community, we had women's music. I mean, it was a very important rallying place, and a place where you would find your own identity sort of in the lyrics, in a sense. Well, what other piece of the agenda does the center and places like the center have?
Well, we go, while we're involved in a lot of the advocacy with some of the larger issues that any of us could talk about, the military, sort of general civil rights, acceptance in society, we also spend most of our time and energy on health issues. And not just AIDS and HIV, but sort of the entire spectrum that would include mental health, addiction recovery services, aspects of participating in society on an equal basis that have to do more with direct service necessarily than advocacy.
There hasn't been much of a connection, except at the center and maybe a few other rare places, between this notion of advocacy and direct services. Yet you would say it's got to be a part of what we do, planning for the future?
I think so, if we're going to have a more whole agenda. I think a lot of focus has been on the advocacy things and on some of the building of culture, and we try to do a little bit of all of that at the center. But I think that some of the other things that we do, building our community from a health standpoint, as I've said, whether that's mental health or physical health or whatever the case might be, has gotten lost because it hasn't been as interesting or as viewed as political, but in reality it is, because it's about who we are and it's about surviving in a healthy, happy way.
And I don't suppose you see a great dichotomy between that. I know that we, people who support the center, although many of us also have used services at the center, it's not always the same population. It seems to me like one of the places where there's the opportunity for people to be articulating a whole lot of different needs and sort of bringing them in.
Right, and taking care of our own too. I mean, the center is a place where people can come and get taken care of in whatever way they need by people who understand what it's like to be a gay man or a lesbian or bisexual person. And that's the kind of thing that we often don't see in other communities. We're a very unique community center in that way. We're more than a drop-in center. We're more than a culture building place. We're a place where you get taken care of.
And that new building's got a lot of places to meet, too.
That's right, that's right.
Fundraisers, our favorite thing, right? Well, in terms of the sort of melding of the political agenda, etc., David, let me ask you, the work that you've done in the civil rights community, we're not the very first movement that's ever had a civil rights agenda, and not the very first movement that's ever thought of using the law to sort of advance the agenda. How do you see sort of that part of our work taking shape, both in connecting kind of and in using the law?
I think the public discussion about lifting the ban in the military for gay men and lesbians to serve has provided a living civics lesson for the entire nation and for the gay and lesbian community as we learn more about the importance of building bridges with other civil rights movements, and that not only do we have so much to learn from the histories of other communities, but that it's vital to the future of our community to reach out to other communities and to continue to build those coalitions so that when we get to important moments like coming before the United States Congress, that we have a battalion of friends and neighbors, not only like ourselves but not like ourselves, who can give voice and power to our movement.
Do you find any personal difficulty in sort of being, I mean, you're kind of like a personal bridge, in essence, between at least the Asian American legal community, certainly Lawyers for Human Rights, and your work just sort of across the board. Do you think we've been very successful at reaching out?
As a community, I think we've made progress. I think we can do better, but that is part of the continuum of life. As long as we emphasize that we are looking forward and we are going to continue to understand what we share in common with other communities, I think we're on the right track. As we discussed earlier, it is appalling that a United States general of color would deny the commonality of interests among minority communities in this country in the context of the military ban. And as lawyers, gay men and lesbian attorneys have a special responsibility to help educate our community and the public at large about the legal issues which mandate equal rights for everyone, including our community.
Thanks. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away.
Who cares?
It's their fault.
So what? Some fags get beat up.
You're such a fag.
It's their own fault.
Deserve to die.
Beat us.
Fag.
Beat up. Faggot.
Hi, welcome back to Get Used to It. Today we're talking about the real lesbian and gay agenda, and I have a number of distinguished guests here to talk about various aspects of our lives, our public lives, and maybe even our private lives, and what that agenda might be. Jehan Agrama, speaking of private lives, no. What piece do you think the work that GLAAD and other organizations like GLAAD does with the media have in sort of the broader lesbian and gay agenda?
Well, I think it's imperative that we deal with the media issues. The reason that we formed GLAAD was that gay and lesbian issues weren't getting anywhere in the law and in the courts. And what we realized is that we have to change public opinion's perception of who we are. They don't know who we are. They don't get to see us regularly. And we need to be more visible, not just dealing with gay and lesbian issues, but in the whole spectrum of mainstream life.
So it's really sort of, but there's also an anti-defamation aspect to it too. I mean, we've still got a lot of work to do around what they're saying about us.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there will always be those that will say the most obscene and horrific things about us, and that's really not what we're interested in trying to change. What we are trying to do is make sure that, for example, news coverage about us is accurate and consistent, that when we are depicted in films that it's not always in a negative light as homicidal maniacs with ice picks and so forth. So it's allowing us to be visible in all our colors.
So how do you do that? I mean, it seems like the mainstream press is pretty interested in saying whatever it wants to say about us, and sometimes it's hard to decide whether it's worse when they're negative or when they're positive. You know, I mean, I see the cover of Newsweek, you know, lesbians. Now, I think it's nice to see the word kind of in bold print in their magazine, but I mean, then you read the article and go, why didn't they ask me to write this, or somebody who, you know, who knows something about
there
it?
really is too many straight people writing about us. That's why I think this show is so great. We get to talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
But the thing is also, we have to work from within as well. We have to create a climate for gays and lesbians who are already working at places like Newsweek to come out and say, I want to write an article about my people. And you know, look at it from that perspective, so that it's not always them talking about us. We don't need to do that, and that's one of the things that GLAAD does when we go into places to talk, whether it's newsrooms or studios. We ask them, how many openly gay and lesbian people do you have? And we really focus on the openly. You know, we're not interested in closet or assumptions.
What about our own autonomous publications? I mean, I know that we sort of have a love-hate relationship sometimes with our magazines and newspapers, and they have a love-hate relationship with everybody they write about, I think, and mostly, I don't know which. But that seems to me, in the same way that, you know, Monica was talking about our own culture being visible in the larger world. Do you think those kind of autonomous publications are a piece of this?
Absolutely. I mean, they're imperative. If you know, until we found ourselves in mainstream papers, there was nowhere else to find ourselves. So we would go to our own publications to read about ourselves, to make connections with other people. And that's vital. I think they have a lot to work on in terms of showing the entire gay and lesbian community, again, in all our colors. I think that, you know, they're too white-focused, as most of the media is. So, I mean, I think there are some changes that are taking place in our own press, but that need to be worked on. And in terms of the visibility, we have to be visible, which is also an issue in the press, mainstream press, which is, all right, we're not shown in a negative light, but then again, we're not even shown in a positive light. We're just not there. We're non-existent. So we want to appear in stories that aren't dealing with AIDS, which is a national health crisis, or, you know, just sex or psychology issues. We want to be talking about taxes, economics, real estate, everywhere that we happen to be, education, child care. These are the issues where we have to become more visible.
Well, the notion of our own autonomous press also has to do, I think, Ruth, with the notion of our own autonomous organizations and groups and organizing. Do you think that to start, I guess, with the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum, and then to go on to discussions we've had about visibility in general, what part do you think that kind of organizing plays in putting together a kind of a national agenda for us?
Well, I think getting people involved is probably the most important. And one of the things that the Black Gay and Lesbian Leadership Forum has been able to do is to get Black, gay, lesbian, and bisexual people around this country together through our national conference that we have every President's Weekend. And you get people who are in small towns who have been in the closet, who didn't know that there were any other Black, gay, and lesbian people in their town even, together, who are able to come and get the strength to go back home and start their own organizations and to garner that kind of support. So I think organizing is very important from that aspect of letting people know that they have alternatives to the bars and things, because in the Black community we have a lot of work to do and have done a lot of work, and now because the racism, the sexism, and all the other isms that the total community talks about fighting, we fight not only with the straight communities but within the gay and lesbian and bisexual communities as well. And as we go out and let them know that we too are here and we're not going anywhere and we must be dealt with on a level basis, then I think it helps the total community.
Well, it's interesting because our agenda, I guess, for ourselves, as we define it, has at least the opportunity of being kind of America in a microcosm.
Yes, that's
because we really are part of absolutely every community, every age group, every economic group. I mean, I don't believe there's a pocket of anything in the United States, however we divide it up, that doesn't have gay and lesbian. They may not know it, but that doesn't have gay and lesbian people in it. So it's sort of an opportunity for the future of our agenda, and I think a lot of people are going to be watching how we deal with it, because people would love for us to fall all over ourselves with our own racism and our own discrimination. You know, well, why should they ask not to be discriminated against? Look what they do to each other, kind of thing.
Well, this is one of the things that our organization faces and deals with and has made great strides to eliminate. I won't name names or instances, but I'm extremely hopeful for our communities at large because of the work that we have done. And it is equally important that we go out into the straight communities, because let's face it, we were all born of straight parents. Maybe not. But
at least they felt they had to be straight in their generation, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that how we treat one another and how we deal with the general community says who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that, you know, the drag queens and a lot of the other people like that were the first people to be visible, and so all the stereotypes and the caricatures come from that setting. And I think that the time will come when there's nobody in America, at least, will be able to say that they don't know somebody who is gay or lesbian or bisexual.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have that responsibility.
Well, one of the things that society does, John, as you know, because this is your life work, is if the society won't do something, we're going to impose some rules on it, or we're going to make it do that. I mean, I think as an attorney, that's the way I think about the law, though I think it's much more variegated than that. What piece of the agenda do you think it's been the most visible? A lot of people talk about it. Americans are funny. They think the law, is they talk about their lives as though they have rights, and they say, I'll make a contract with you, all that stuff. What part does the law have in our agenda?
Well, it's kind of been the American heritage that almost all issues end up in the courts eventually. De Tocqueville wrote about that centuries ago. I think that I disagree with Jehan a little. I don't think that we've gotten nowhere through the law, but we haven't gotten there very quickly. And I think we need to have some perspective on that. The law has been an embodiment for Americans, and particularly constitutional issues have been represented an embodiment of the best, the highest aspirations that our country has for itself. And so when any group of people feel that they're being disenfranchised and excluded, they can go to the courts to say, live up, America, to what you should stand for. And that, there have been advances, but there's still an incredible amount of repression that lesbians and gay men and others in American society still face. The law has been a way of both exposing those and serving as a rallying point for other work to show in specific instances how individual lesbians and gay men are not being treated fairly and not being treated with equality.
Sort of requires that we have those kind of individual heroes in a way, because I mean, there's no greater hero than a plaintiff.
That's true.
In these cases.
And a lot of those plaintiffs have been real heroes in terms of putting their lives on the line to kind of become that symbol of the injustice that all lesbians and gay men face in aspects of our lives.
Well, we'll certainly be coming back to all of these issues right after this break. Don't go away. We're going to mix it up in just a minute. Hi, welcome back to Get Used to It. Today, as I hope you already know, we're talking about the real lesbian and gay agenda, in which real lesbian and gay people are talking about our agenda. What a concept. Just to remind you, I'm very pleased my guests today are John Davidson, Ruth Waters, Jehan Agrama, David Tseng, Lorri Jehan, and Monica Palacios. Okay, now's the time when we get to actually talk to each other. One of the things that I think comes, a thread that really sort of comes out of everything you've said, goes to how those of us who are sort of thinking about where to move something, who are activists or whatever, have to and should think about the real lives of gay and lesbian people not involved in the movement yet, or who are just trying to live their lives and not be discriminated against. How do you think the pieces that you've talked about can help the real lives of people who aren't working yet on these issues? I mean, how does the media help? How does the law help? How does the center help?
When we, for example, have gone on a show and talked about media images, or the Roseanne show, for example, what that does, it's a highest rated show, and when they have a gay or lesbian character on it, people from all over the nation call in, send us letters about having seen that, and that's imperative because, yes, in the big cities there's a very visible, active lesbian and gay community, but in the smaller cities there aren't, so people are feeling really alone. It's very important to put those images of other gays and lesbians for them, either on television, on the radio, in the movie theaters, so that they have something to relate to, so that they realize that they're not alone.
I think that's really important. I think that one of the things that makes our community different from many other communities is the extent to which lesbians and gay men struggle with their identity at the beginning very much alone in adolescence, and coming to realize that you're gay or lesbian is something very much you do on a kind of by yourself, as opposed to many other communities where you have a family that's supporting you. And I think it's important to have those connections, whether they be through the media and seeing somebody else that you can kind of identify with and relate to, or a story of a hero who's in a lawsuit, or seeing something in the arts, that you can have those kind of connections to give you the strength to accept yourself.
I think it's really important as a performer, when I do shows after shows, people come up to me and say, thank you for being here today. You really gave me a lot of insight as to what I'm about. I feel a lot better about myself. And it was, one show did this for quite a few people, and it's very great when I go to colleges, because really young people who don't really know what they're, getting into and somewhat confused, and they just like really I mean, I've made their day practically to be there and to say I'm a lesbian and I'm having a great time, you know, because they don't get that.
Well, it just shows we've got to be doing everything everywhere, whether it's in the law, social services, arts, culture, you name it. We're impacting people's lives in every one of these arenas, and the more we're out there, the more we're working on it. It may be 10 people here, it may be 1,000 people there, but ultimately we're making the inroads that we need to make in touching
It's about
people.
visibility and maintaining that.
One of the other things that's important about that is that once we start showing ourselves in our full array, then it gives other people that strength, and it forms those bridges we talk about forming to the straight community. In my job, I'm not fortunate enough to have to work within the community, so I work in the very straight world, and I'm very out, and it's surprising the kind of support you get when you are out, and it's almost like you become an 800-pound gorilla. You know, everybody thinks, "Oh, great! You know, I can deal with you because I was a person first." And then they say, "Well, she's a pretty nice person, or she's straightforward, or whatever they think about me." There's a certain amount of respect, and then they're able to show that in various ways and be more accepting to the people that they may know who are in the closet.
Maybe that's why they struggle so much against our visibility. I mean, it's one of the things that I'm more familiar with how we use the law to do it, but I think it's true in all of these aspects, is to try to insist on visibility and to try to push the sort of the edges of the envelope, as it were, on visibility, to make sure when all the sponsors withdraw because there's a gay character on a show, that there's somebody there to complain about it. I mean, I feel like there's this sort of this chessboard, and there's a bright light on the chessboard, and there have been people on one side and sort of silence on this side, but off here outside the light, organizing, finding each other, building these bridges, and now all of a sudden, really in the last 5 years, boom, we're in the spotlight now, sort of in the middle of the griddle, as they say.
Sheila, if I could just elaborate on the chessboard analogy, I'd like to take it one step further in the sense that I would very much like for gay men and lesbians in this country not to view themselves as pawns, but as kings and queens.
Right.
People who have power. We can empower ourselves by constantly reminding ourselves that we are role models, that it's important that we share our lives and experiences with people that we know in the straight community, to humanize our community and demonstrate to them that we belong to the same institutions, the same churches and synagogues, that we care about our communities, we care about potholes in the streets, we care about the quality of life in our cities. We're proud to be citizens of this country, and show that we have a commitment to enriching the life of America, and therefore it's in the vested interest of the straight community to ensure our rights.
But you wouldn't say we always have to be on our best behavior, would you, David?
No.
You know, I mean, there's nobody here at the moment from, say, Queer Nation, although I have to say, of course, they've been on the show before, and it's a very big part of what our agenda is. I think street activism, when you were talking about what Monica reminded me, the Puerto Rican drag queens from Stonewall, who were the ones that said, okay, we're the most marginalized, we're the outlaws, screw you, we're going to take to the streets. And it was a big start for us, where we would then, I don't know, I just felt different about it. I felt proud of them,
It's true. I mean, the silence issue of trying to keep us silent is raising a lot of money for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we are a threat. Our visibility is a threat because we are not threatening. We are not the big evil that people would like to make money off of or scare people.
So it destroys the mythology of that evil.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why there's been such a backlash to the whole military issue, because for the first time, the President of the United States has said, gay and lesbian people are equal partners in the society, and I'm going to implement that. And the far right is standing up and realizing if they lose this battle, they lose a hell of a lot more than gay and lesbian soldiers.
Well, the issue of the military is a good one, and I don't know, as this show gets rerun, we don't know, history's going to catch up and overturn us, but for the moment anyway, there was a lot of talk within our community, sort of like, where the hell did this issue come from? Which is like, who's setting this agenda? It seems like sometimes people, straight people, not in our community, whether they're the president of the United States or the president of the corporation or, you know, some ACLU lawyer who's not a gay man, getting ahead of the movement, as it were. You know, who sets the agenda? This military issue seemed to have arisen a little bit outside our community.
Well, I also think that because we are such a diverse community, I think it's also people within the lesbian and gay agenda setting the agenda. And there doesn't seem to be a cohesion across the nation of, well, this is what we want to tackle next. There doesn't seem to be an agreement across the board. I mean, there's a lot of agreement.
No, I mean, we're so diverse that I think you know, the question is which organization would anyone trust to really be setting the agenda for all of us?
You know, the other thing is, this isn't the only issue we're working on.
Sure.
This is the one that, I mean, that the sort of the media has said, this is interesting.
Well, and it came to the fore in part because it was something that I think the president thought he could do quickly and without requiring Congress's approval. And, you know, unfortunately, that was a little overly optimistic. But you know, I do think that it's clearly a part of the agenda. You know, we have a very broad agenda that I think is much the same agenda as all Americans have. It's agenda seeking equality, seeking respect, seeking preservation of our families, health, safety. But a part of it is to not be discriminated against by our government. And I think that's something all Americans share. And what's come down to now is partially the issue of whether or not, since it's been accepted that there are lesbians and gay men in the military, always have been, always will be, the issue is to what extent we can be open, to what extent we'll be forced to continue to live lives in the closet. And that is an important issue for us, not only because of our being able to be free and being able to live our lives proudly, but to combine with other lesbians and gay men and organize. But also, there are lots of studies that show that the best predictor of people's attitudes about lesbians and gay men is whether somebody knows people who are lesbian and gay. And so, to the extent that we are able to come out of the closet, it helps change people's attitudes and ends up leading to acceptance of us when people see who we really are.
Well, you know, I think one of the things also that I think all of us who are leaders, whether we consider ourselves leaders or not, has to be to change our total community from that victim mentality to one of veteran mentality. I thought about it when David was speaking, in that as long as I've been in the community, I've heard us talked about as the victims. And they say, now we're the last victims of discrimination. Well, I'm going to be discriminated against regardless of whether the gay and lesbian movement flourishes or not, because I'm black. But at the same time, I have never been a victim of anybody. I refer to myself as a veteran of many wars. A few I've lost, and most of them I win. But that is what we must do in our communities across this country. And it's very good that your program is now going to Washington and San Francisco, because in the large communities, if we can become veterans rather than victims, then we can recruit all of the other veterans in the little towns and give us all that huge battalion.
That's right.
That you were talking about earlier.
And if we can spread the word that in reality we do win most battles, especially on an individual level. When you come out to people and you talk about who you are and they respect you and like you, they're going to change their minds about what it means to be gay and lesbian, and then we're going to be able to get a lot more people in the battle.
Yeah, and you know, we've got to make room for those people that are still in the closet and tell them, send us your check, or come down and just light a little candle in the dark and write on the envelope, because every step they take is empowering.
Yeah, definitely. It's about empowering yourself and your group, and that's exactly what Viva Gay and Lesbian Latino Artists, that's what we do. You know, our mission statement is to discover, promote, and empower gay and lesbian Latino artists. And that's what we do in every possible way that we can.
There's still a lot of pain, though, don't you think?
Definitely.
There's a lot of pain and a lot of sort of trauma coming out. I was thinking of another image, Ruth, when you were talking of the way, no matter how far you get, that you need to make sure that you're holding hands with the person who's not quite that far. And someone else is, you know, it's like this long chain of people. It's kind of pulling each other out of a swamp or something, you know? I mean, I feel as though we really are saving lives. I feel that way. I mean, I love the story of the center and the IRS because it's so, I don't know, it's sort of poetic justice, I guess. I'm sure our audience in Washington doesn't know. Will you tell them?
No, the Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center has a brand new building that we bought and totally renovated, 45,000 square feet, that used to be the IRS. And 22 years ago, when we went in, is the very first gay and lesbian organization to try to get nonprofit status. That's where we had the battles, with the IRS telling us they wouldn't give us the private nonprofit status because how could we be benevolent?
So now we bought the damn building.
Now we bought the building. That's right.
I love
empowerment.
Yeah, really. But I mean, that's a place where you really see people just beginning to kind of get their lives back together. Many people who've been, you know, abused in a lot of ways, not just by homophobia, but that's an additional sort of self-hating aspect of it. It's a big youth program, and I want to talk about our agenda in the youth too, because that's a lot of people talk about youth, but it seems to me that as long as the suicide rate is still highest among gay and lesbian youth, that this is a major problem, I think, in how to get this on our agenda. What do you think?
I think it's important. You know, whenever we want to introduce discussions in high school level, junior high level, elementary school level about gays and lesbians, we immediately get bombarded with, well, this isn't sex and it's no time for sex. But what people need to realize that some of those kids are gay and lesbian that are sitting in those chairs, and some of our kids who are straight are sitting in those chairs, and they need to be educated about who their parents are and what our lives are about. And I think that the youth the current youth is a lot healthier. There are a lot more of them that are out. And so I think that, you know, there is a lot of progress in that way for all the work that has come before. But I think that a lot has to be done, and I hope that we do get the chance to be educating. I mean, like Project 10 in Los Angeles, you know, a haven for gay and lesbian youth in the high schools. It's imperative.
I think, you know, one of the things you point out is really true in terms of what kind of lessons are being taught to our youth and what happens when our youth sees discrimination going on. One of the lawsuits I've been involved in some time is on behalf of a gay man who was excluded from being a Boy Scout leader. Right. And one of the harms involved in that form of discrimination is not just to the individual who's turned down from the leadership position, but it's to all the children who are in that program, in terms of the children who are gay or lesbian and what they have to look forward to and their fears about what happens if they're discovered, but also the children who have gay and lesbian family members and how that makes them feel about what it means to be gay or lesbian in this society, and the children who don't yet know anyone who's openly gay or lesbian, and what sort of attitudes that reinforces towards gay and lesbian people.
You know, a lot of times I think people don't realize if you're gay and lesbian and you're celibate, never have sex anymore in your life, you're still gay and lesbian. Just like if you're heterosexual and you never have sex.
I'm really glad to hear that, Jehan, actually.
There's hope. There's hope.
But I thought we should have called the March on Washington the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Self-Sufficient March on Washington. I think we could have attracted a whole lot more people. What do you think? A whole lot of people.
But, you know, I think that programs like this and other things, as we reach out into the community, will help parents, because parents know when their children are gay or lesbian, and they pull down the blind, and so the child suffers. But I think the more visible we become, then we give those parents the ability to nurture those children and save their lives and make them more productive without having to go through some of the scenes that older gay and lesbian people went through, that self-destructive stage. I have a gay daughter and a gay grandson, and watching them in their maturing has been very interesting. And because, not necessarily because of me, but because of how the whole family has acted since my emergence.
Well, you know, the notion of family, I was thinking about it because, again, sort of seeing it from what the law will force society to do, it seems to me that it's also true in the issue about the military, and that is certain statuses are created in society and held up to be good, right? The ability to marry has always been withheld from a disfavored class. Many have overcome it, but there's always, you can read back in the Supreme Court cases, you know, first African Americans weren't allowed to marry at all. It was a privilege that was withheld, made them less than human. Then, of course, not allowed to marry white people. And the notion of the withholding that kind of official family status, I think it's the same thing with the military. They set it up so that it's supposed to be a really neat thing to be cannon fodder. You know, I mean, in a sense, they set it up so you can't get an education, you can't get a job, you have to go into the Army in order to survive economically. And a lot of our youth are in exactly the same circumstances, join the Army, and then they make it like a wonderful thing to be in the Army. And to show you how wonderful it is, we're going to exclude these disfavored classes, whether it's people of color or women or us. And so I think it's a way of dehumanizing us in society by saying, you see how inhuman they are? They can't even marry or be in the Army.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the horror cases that, that's in our history, Plessy versus Ferguson, about that treated African Americans as less than fully human, less than fully citizens in our country, pointed to the fact that African Americans could not serve in the military as evidence that they were less than full persons.
Right, it's like discrimination makes discrimination okay. And I think that's definitely been the attitude with us.
As an Asian American, I would be remiss if I didn't add that the Exclusion Acts also prohibited immigration to this country of Chinese Americans, such that you had a pool of Chinese American men who didn't have women with whom they could marry from the community, thereby again dehumanizing that particular element of the community. But I think that the issue of families and youth has got to be one of the priorities for our community agenda. One of the things that bothered me during Roberta Achtenberg's confirmation hearings was the whole Boy Scout issue. If you may recall that when the supporters of Achtenberg were saying, well, she was one of, 49 people on the board of directors of the United Way that denied funding for the Boy Scouts. In other words, they were trying to dilute her power in a particular situation when, in fact, she was doing the right thing. And it seemed to me that doing the right thing was de-emphasized in the public discussion. I suppose that is one of the compromises that we have to make as we judge how we advance our agenda, because the bottom line was that Roberta was confirmed, which is overall in the best interest of our community.
I think that we have to do a better job at getting the straight or the non-gay, lesbian, bisexual community to join this struggle. It seems to me that while we have made progress, and you mentioned that before, it's sort of up to a point. Yes, we'll support you up to a point. And I don't think that a lot of what we're talking about, what we're struggling for, the Boy Scout issue being one of them, is fully understood or grasped. And until we become a true coalition of human beings, I see that we're going to still be coming up to, don't ask, don't tell. You're in here, but don't say anything, which is a sham, which is an absolute sham.
Well, it's the same way at work. I mean, I see the blending of the discrimination at work and discrimination about family, where they say, well, you can work here, but don't have a picture of you and your lover on the desk. Whereas other people can, have pictures of their families. And it kind of starts to blend about you're lesser at work because we won't even let you have this picture.
Right. I just thought of something. All of us must know some older people, even older than me. And I can remember, I know very old people who were directors of places like the Girl Scouts, the YWCA, the YMCA. What would happen if we could make a search for those people who stayed in the closet those years but who held those key positions in those kinds of
and have all those
organizations,
awards up on their walls and
yes,
things,
and get them to come out and say, hey, what did I do? You honored me.
Like the Margaretta Kalmeyers of all these other things.
Yes.
And whether we're talking about seniors, whether we're talking about youth, that's a good way to build coalition, because when you see what happens to the youth in our society, our youth and other youth around issues of sexuality, we ought to be able to build some good coalition there, as in all of the social services arena and world, which is huge in this country. And social services providers understand that there's a certain level at which it doesn't make a difference who we are. We need to have some help, and we need to be treated the same way.
Absolutely.
And that's where places like the Center or other direct service organizations, if we can use them to build connections in the broader non-gay and lesbian community on those issues, then we've got a whole cadre of folks that we should be able to mobilize on the other issues.
Well, it's certainly true in the AIDS agenda as it shifts more, as attention should shift more to the variety of communities that are being totally decimated by AIDS, and the kind of coalitions that we're building and that have been built with us. I mean, when the ADA being written, the coalition between the disabled community and our community really worked for both in a way. And I think that the religious communities, where they're right thinking in a sense, or left thinking, I guess, are building those kinds of coalitions. The youth services, people I know in the county, for instance, have cross referrals and gay youth in all the shelters that they're aware of.
But we still don't have an AIDS czar as
Yeah.
at this taping. So I mean, it's, you know, I don't know. It's, you know, we have a coalition. It's becoming more than just a gay issue. It's becoming a national health crisis, and yet, you know, where are we? Where are we with this?
What it means is that there are a lot of different strands to empowerment of the community. And one of them in which we have a lot of work to do is political empowerment. Getting our people to understand the value of the vote, getting them to register, getting them to participate, getting them to run for public office, and take
getting
power
them
for
to demand
ourselves.
more from candidates.
Yes.
For our community.
Yeah, we pour a lot of money into people who just go, "You're not a monster." Oh, thank you. I mean, you know, it's like, I think we have to have a slightly higher standard and support our own, of course, which is very important if people can be talked into running.
Well, right, and how much more stringent will our standards be when, in a case like President Clinton's, there were no ifs, ands, or buts about the promises that he made about the military, and if in fact he backs off from that, then just saying things might not be enough either.
On the other hand, who are we going to vote for? I mean, they
Well,
take
that's
us for
right.
granted, and it's sort of like we sit around and say to ourselves, you know, where are you going to run to?
Right.
Well,
It's
you
none
know,
of the
it's not
above?
the president at this point. We've got to talk to
People in Congress, yeah.
people
That's
in
right.
Congress.
That's right. Well, we have to make it unacceptable to express bigotry, period, in all of its forms. And what this is all about is gradations of bigotry, and some are okay and some aren't. And that's the word we've got to get out. Somehow we've got to make people understand that bigotry is bigotry, whether it's under a white sheet in Selma, Alabama, under a white tablecloth in the Senate dining room, or behind a white collar. No matter what it is, we've got to get rid of it.
Or in our own communities.
In our own communities especially.
You know, you're talking about there's no AIDS czar. One of the critiques that I've read in the straight press about our movement is that we don't have one strong, visible leader. Where's the Martin Luther King of your movement? I think all of those superficial weekly news magazines have written. Do you think we can have an agenda without a strong leader?
I mean, it's interesting you bring up Martin Luther King. That was one leader that I suppose the media liked better than the other leaders, but the black community didn't just have one leader. It was a leader, he was the leader that perhaps the white community preferred, and that's why he was, you know, put up there. Not take anything away, obviously, from what he did, but there were more. There were others. And I think that our strength will come from the quantity of leaders that we have, the quantity of organizations all working towards a common goal.
Yeah, we're too diverse to have one person represent.
For every voice that we have, there is an ear. Whether it be Queer Nation, there are people out there who don't hear anybody else but them. And it goes right straight across the board. It's the reason we have so many religions and things in our country is every time anybody opens their mouth, there's somebody who will listen. And we need all of the diverse leaders that we have because they will speak to somebody. And when those somebodies get together, then action takes place.
We also need to define our movement ourselves and not let others, again, set the agenda for us.
Yes.
And if that means that we grow organically and have 1,000 Martin Luther Kings, then that's okay too.
One of the things that's wonderful about our community is I think the extent to which it's building other models than the traditional patriarchal kind of white heterosexual male model of a leader meant one person who was directing everybody underneath them. And I think each lesbian or gay man or bisexual who comes out of the closet and does whatever they can at the time that they're ready to is a leader, that they are leading the movement forward in terms of everyone they come in contact with.
There's also the aspect of responsibility. I was thinking, looking around at the six of you and others who've been on the show earlier, that it's sort of like you develop a certain set of skills. They were very personal in your development of them, but then you, for some reason, had to kind of put them in the service of the community. What you do with and for the community. That really is leadership, I think, in our community. And the agenda is so variegated, it seems as though we need to do this. in a sense, about building the agenda? How does the media fit into the political, fit into, you know, the personal and the arts? And it all seems to me to have such a relationship. But it's individual people just taking their piece of it, because no one person could look out for it, in a sense.
Well, I think that why I really like working in Los Angeles, and you know, from what I hear about other cities, we have a roundtable. We do, on a monthly basis, if not more often, sit around and talk to each other about what are we going to do about this issue, this problem, how are we going to deal with it as a community, and that we use one another's strengths. And I think that's important, and we need to do that more, because there is room for everybody, and not one group or one person can handle it all, because you won't speak to everybody, like Ruth said.
One of the things that we've done in our organization is recently we have developed a board of governors who are people from around the country, so that we get input from their locations as to what's going on for people in their area, and so we can provide support or get information as to how to handle something locally. So it's that kind of thing that helps us all to grow, because we're not just sitting on the local information and the local thing. We're trying to make it broad enough so that we can help not only ourselves but the general community by knowing what's going on and putting things where they ought to be.
I think that's happening more also. I mean, there are lots of computer networks now networking us nationally. And GLAD, for example, has 9 chapters. There's a chapter in DC and also San Francisco. So we communicate on our own network about what are we doing media-wise and how can we work together and do like GLAD USA national actions. So a lot of local organizations, or that organizations that started locally, are branching out nationally and, you know, creating a much closer dialogue.
Yeah, I think the notion of organization and community organizing, and I guess essentially coming out, I go back to what you kind of started with, John, about how we come to consciousness mostly in a negative way about our own gayness, individually, in very isolated. It feels, I don't know, maybe the rest of you had a different experience, but it was pretty lonely, very secretive, very scary, lots of sort of negative stuff. And I guess the key to all this has to be coming out. But there must be still a lot of people in our community, or not yet in our community, who still feel a lot of impediments to coming out. What would you say to them?
Take the risk. Look around you. See how many people are out there doing the kinds of things that you admire, that you respect, and sometimes not. But they're all making it. We don't have a machine gun cutting us down here. Take the risk, come out, give it a shot. That's what I say.
Yeah, I think that the fear of the closet and the pain that people go through by not being who they are is far greater than anything you encounter as being an openly lesbian or gay person. There's just no comparison. And it's hard to believe when you're sitting in that closet and feeling protected. But really, you're not living your life. You're living somebody else.
About who you are.
Your silence never protects you.
There is a reality that sometimes coming out, there may be hard things that you're going to experience in terms of temporary rejections and some hard times that you might face. But people get beyond that and get through that. And what's on the other side is really incredibly wonderful, to feel that you can live your life openly and freely and affirmed and connected to the other wonderful lesbians and gay men that make up our country.
You know,
world.
One of the things that people give as an excuse for not coming out is the loss of jobs. And I usually suggest to people, well, where do you live and what are the laws where you live? Because there's so many laws now that say you cannot be fired. And if you in fact do your job well and the law says you can't be fired, there are organizations that will stand behind you and to see that you don't. So it's up to you. You have those choices to make. That's the thing that people don't understand. They never equate it down to their level.
And I guess that's sort of the final point, is the way all of this weaves together. And that is that we need to use each other. We need to use all of our organizations. We need to use the arts. We need to use our social services. We need to use our attachment or availability of the media. We need to use our own coming out. We need to tell people, get used to it. This is the end of a show. Doesn't the time go by fast? I don't know. Maybe it's only me, but thank you, John. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Jehan. Thank you, David. Thank you, Lorri. Thank you, Monica. And thank you. There's going to be some phone numbers. Maybe they're showing right now. I never know when I look in the camera. To tell you how to contact some of the organizations and groups that we've been talking about. Thanks for watching the show. Be sure that you take a piece of this agenda yourself. Take the next step, and they'll get used to it. Thanks.